do you do if you decide to have a brunch? One of those jolly, informal Sunday breakfast lunch combos. Well, this is how you do it. Brunch for a bunch. Today on The French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Well, what you do when you are planning a brunch, which is really a combination of breakfast and lunch, you've got to have something fruity and eggy for the people who haven't had any breakfast, and then you've got to have something hearty and meaty or fishy for those who are making this their lunch and they've already had breakfast. And I think it's a very good occasion to have a fish dish, and especially if you have something unusual like a Brandade de morue or like a Gratin de morue à la lyonnaise. And morue, which is spelled M-O-R-U-E, turns out to be salt codfish. And here it is. That's what these two delicious dishes begin with. And the salt codfish is made out of one of these beautiful, beautiful cods, which are fished all over the Atlantic Ocean and have been done so by time immemorial. And what happens is that the fishermen go out in their boat and they catch all the cod, and then they open them up and take the backbone out, and then they put them down in the hold of the ship, and with the salt on the bottom and salt on top, and then they pile them up and pile them up and pile them up until the ship is absolutely full, and then they come home and they sell them. And they sell them to a processor who then takes them out and washes them off and resalts them, and the salt is what preserves them. And they're dried out. And when we were in Norway, several summers ago, we went to some of these big sheds where the cod were kept, and you just saw them piled up. And this, when it comes in this form, as you can see, there are still the fins, and the head is off, and that's the inside. This is called a bacalao. And something you can buy, it depends on what market you go to. You can buy it like this, a whole fish, or you can buy it cut up, and it's called bacalao, that's the way it's spelled. And it has the skin on it, and it's just as hard as a rock. And these are rather primitive ways of buying them, but that's the way some people like them. But the easiest way to buy them is, it's called skinless and boneless salt cod fillets. And they come in this familiar wooden box, or they come in a piece of plastic, or they come in a cardboard box that is painted to look like a wooden box. And these are the easiest to do. I'll show you how they are, and whether it's whatever kind of a box it comes in or a package, it's all exactly the same. They're skinless and boneless fillets, and they always weigh 1 pound. We were talking to a packing plant in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and they said, well, they were awfully tired of the wooden box because you had humidity problems and everything like that. And so they packaged their salt cod fillets in a can, and nobody wanted to buy them. They were used to this little old wooden box. So they finally gave it up altogether, and they're just making codfish balls. We have another place in Massachusetts which imports cod. And what's useful about having salt cod fillets is that you can keep them in the refrigerator, just in the back corner, for months, and that they're preserved perfectly by their salt. And then when you want to use them, you have to get the salt out. And it's not an instant food like frozen food. You have to desalt them by soaking them. So you just open up the package, stick them in some cold water, and I find that the And it really, though they say 10, 12 hours to desalt them, I like it much better to desalt them in the refrigerator, changing the water several times and counting on about one whole day, because you really want to freshen them up. And this is freshed up, and I want you to see the difference between the soaked cod and the salted one. There you are, hard as a rock, and here you are, fresh and white and soft. It's just like a fresh fish. And as soon as you get the salt out, it is like a fresh fish. That's why I think desalting in the icebox is a good idea. And no matter how you're going to cook them, you give salt cod a preliminary, a poaching, in a court bouillon. And a court bouillon means a flavored liquid. And in this case, it's flavored with onion and a few spices. And I just grate the onion because it cooks faster through a coarse grater. And then we're going to put in about 3 or 4 whole cloves and 4 or 5 peppercorns. I'm using the white pepper so it isn't going to darken the fish quite as well, but it doesn't make too much difference. And the onion is a medium size. And then 2 imported bay leaves. I always like imported bay leaves because it tastes more, I like the taste better. And then that's your flavoring. And then you want to cook it, the flavoring, for about 10 or 15 minutes in about a cup of water. And there just has a cup of water there. Cover the pan and let it simmer for about 10 minutes, and that it cooks the onion and gets the flavor out of the ingredients. And then you put in 4 cups of cold water and your cod. And you put in cold water because if you want to cook the fish slowly, and you don't want it to go into hot water. You want it to come gradually up to the barest simmer. The heat is just about 190 degrees, and you'll see that there's a little white foam that rises. And then as soon as that's happened, you don't want to let it boil because boiling toughens it. You take it off heat and put on the cover. And then you let it steep for 10 minutes, and that finishes the cooking of the fish. It's really just as though it were poached. And then after the 10 minutes are up, you want to taste a little piece of it and see if it needs some salt. And surprise, surprise, if you've thoroughly desalted the fish, it always needs a little salt. So put in about 1.5 teaspoons of salt, stir it around, cover the pan again, and let it sit 5 minutes longer or longer. You can let it, doesn't make any difference how long it sits, or you could, it does to a certain extent, not for hours and hours, but if it's cooled off, put it in the refrigerator. And then you're ready to cook it. Now for both of these recipes, we're going to use potatoes. And for the Brandade, which is a kind of a puree, we're going to use a baked potato. And I'm going to cook it in my microwave oven. So take a fork and poke the potato. And this is a nice big one. And this is a portable microwave, so I've got to plug it in. And this potato, they take about 11 or 12 minutes. So I'll put it in, has to be turned halfway through. So I'll put it in for about 6 minutes. And then I'll come back and turn it and it'll be all baked. That's a very useful thing about the microwave. It goes so fast. And now we have our poached fish. I'm going to take it out so you can see what it looks like. This way. And you save the poaching liquid because you may be making a fish chowder out of this, or you may want to, like in their gratin, which is cream codfish, you're going to have some potatoes, boiled potatoes, and you can boil the potatoes in the poaching liquid. That's a In other words, don't waste anything that might have some good flavor to it. And just hold on to that poaching liquid. You might also want to add some to a sauce. And now, this is not flaking the fish, this is separating it into its natural leaves. If you notice that the thick part of the fish always comes out nicely in its natural leaves, while the thin part makes little tiny leaves. So what, if you're going to do something, if you're going to have, say, 2 types of cod dishes, you can just save the thick part for something like creamed cod, and the other for a mashed cod dish. And now we're going to start. The first recipe of the 2 that we're going to do is the creamed codfish, and that's going to be creamed cod à la lyonnaise. And this is blanched salt pork, lean salt pork, diced and then simmered for 5 minutes in water and drained, and then sautéed very slowly in just a little bit of oil until it renders its fat and browns very, very lightly. And then as soon as that is browned, 3 or 4 minutes, then in go 4 cups of sliced onions. And then stir that around and put on a cover and let it cook until the onions are nice and tender, just like this. See, there they are. They're tender and they're just barely browned. And then, after this is done, we're going to make a cream sauce, but you want to drain the fat out, because you've got quite a bit of fat there. And just drain it out. You'll see how much was in there. Then put the onions and pork back in again. And then we want 1/3 cup of flour. This is going to thicken the sauce. And then what we're making is a roux, R-O-U-X, the beginning of any sauce. And then add a little bit more of the fat. You just want enough fat so that the flour and onions will be absorbed. I mean that the flour will absorb into the onions and the fat so that you can make your roux. And you want to cook this 2 or 3 minutes to be sure that you cook the flour. And then take it off heat, and then you have some warm medium cream, or half and half. Or if you're on a diet, you could just use milk, but it wouldn't be nearly as good. Then stir it around. Put in, at the beginning, about 1½ cups or so. What we're going to have is about 3 cups of sauce. And if it's too thick, you can always add a little bit of your cod cooking juice. And then you want to cook this for about 10 or 15 minutes to get all the flavor of the onions and the pork and everything else into the sauce, because it makes a delicious mixture. Now I'll just put some more in. You want the sauce to be moderately thick, but not too much so. And then taste it very carefully for seasoning. As with everything, you want to have it perfectly seasoned. It needs a little more salt, and it needs a little pepper. It usually needs pepper because this is the first time any pepper has hit this dish. And a little more salt. Now I'm just going to let that simmer very slowly, and I'm going to go over and look at my potato. Now what you usually find is that part of the potato is getting a little bit soft and the rest not. So you always have to, when you're doing a microwave thing, you want to turn it around and switch positions about halfway through the cooking. Now I'm going to set it for 6 minutes more and get back to my sauce here. Now we'll say that that has cooked for 10 or 15 minutes and is just exactly right. We're now ready to assemble the cream codfish dish, which is called Gratin de morue à la lyonnaise, or just cream codfish with onions. And we have the codfish, and we have potatoes and cheese. And we have a buttered dish that it's going on. And this, I'm going to thin out this sauce just a little bit, with a little bit of my cod cooking juice, and then put a little bit in the bottom of the dish. Whenever you do this kind of a dish, you always put some sauce in the bottom of it, and then we put on potatoes. These are about 3 or 4 cups of boiled potatoes, sliced 3/8 inch thick. And then I have about a cup of grated Swiss cheese. This is the kind of dish that you can really do just about any way you want. It's mainly to give you the idea of it. And here is this lovely poached cod. And I think the pre-cooking of it and that little very subtle flavoring of herbs and whatnot gives it an extremely nice flavor. And then I'm going to put a little bit more cheese on and a little bit more sauce. You find that cod needs quite a bit of sauce, particularly when it's done with the potatoes. It needs fattening up. And then on go the rest of the potatoes. It's a kind of dish you can very much make up as you go along, depending on how much cod, how many potatoes, and that kind of business. And then there goes more cheese. And there's more sauce. You see, once you get this all done, it's not a very difficult dish to assemble. One thing you want to be sure that you end up with enough sauce to cover the dish with. This would, gosh, I don't know how many people this would serve. Probably 8, 10, 11, 12. It would depend entirely how much else you had on the menu. It makes just a lovely supper dish also. It's one of those expandable things. And now, to make it brown nicely, put on some breadcrumbs, just a little from some white bread, and then I have a little extra fat left from the pork, and just drizzle that on. If you don't have any, put on a little bit of melted butter, and then you can do this ahead of time and put it in the refrigerator, and then when you're ready to bake it, put it into the middle level of a 375 oven. It'll take about 35 minutes. That's about the upper middle, but that's all right. The main thing, you want it to just bubble up and brown and the top to brown nicely. And now we have our second dish, the Brandade de morue. And I'm going to get my baked potato. There it is. I'm just going to you're supposed to let them finish cooking a little bit so that you just let it sit for a minute or two. Because the microwave has to do something to all the molecules. And then this is the same cod. We have so little time, I've had to do some things ahead. This is the same cod that's been stirred over heat, that has been poached, and then stirred over heat with olive oil until it's nice and warm. And it's begun to sort of mash and flake up. This is just to break it up. And for this, I use the thin part of the cod, which you can do perfectly well. And this Brandade is what it is. It's a puree. It's a kind of a super dip. It's a wonderful breakfast dish and just marvelous for brunch. Now, this is going to go into a mixer. And the potato. I trust that is now, hot. One thing in cooking, you have to train yourself to handle hot things. I could use that towel. But you want to be sure that everything is warm in this, because it's all going to be beaten up together. In the old days, and all the original recipes for this Brandade, which comes from the south of France, you beat it, pound it in a mortar, and you beat it, and it just takes all day to do. But with the invention of the electric mixer, it's turned the Brandade into something really very easy to do. And the first recipe I saw using it was of Craig Claiborne, who had it in the New York Times. Now, rather than taking all day, it's just a matter of minutes. Just beat that up, and then you begin adding warm cream and warm olive oil. So there's your pan. I'm going to put a little olive oil in there. You'll put in about half a cup or so of good fruity olive oil, and a half to a cup of cream, standing well away. And then a bit at a time. You're aiming at the consistency of mashed potatoes. If you don't like cream, you can use milk. But this is a specialty of around Nîmes and Arles in the southern France, and people just absolutely adore this Brandade de morue. And there was an old president of France, Mr. Adolphe Thiers, and he loved it so much, and his doctor said that he shouldn't have any. So we had an old friend who came with Brandade de morue in his briefcase, and the two of them sat in the president's library and ate this wonderful dish. And now, you want to have garlic in it. That's because that's this Provençal, and put 1 or 2 cloves of garlic in. I'm just putting in 1 now, but you probably put in 3, 4, or 5. And pepper and salt. And then you taste it very carefully. And the wonderful thing about it is it tastes like, well, you think, well, this is sort of, it's like mashed potatoes, but it isn't mashed potatoes. And it has that wonderful flavor, and you can't you'd say to yourself, well, it couldn't be codfish in there. But that's exactly just what it is. And people who've never had it before, we served it to some very fancy types in the summer. And they just went absolutely mad at it. And we had lots of garlic in it, and they all smelt wonderfully garlicky. You know, this should always be served warm, and you can make it ahead of time, but put in less cream than you usually would, and then stir it over heat in your frying pan, and then stir in some warm cream until it's nice and warm. Then I always like to put a few olives on the top, just because I think it's rather jolly. And then put a little parsley around, as usual, just to lighten things up. Some people like a little bit of lemon juice with it, and you could put lemon wedges along, and then little croutons of white bread sauteed in olive oil, and then you eat it with that, like a dip. Or if you're going to use it as a first course, you serve the little toasts with it, and they're just absolutely delicious. This is such an unusual dish. You wouldn't think that, that anyone would have thought of turning cod into something so delicious and fancy. So this is ready to go into the dining room, and we shall see the brunch set up. Now here, my guests are coming fairly soon, so I can just give you a run through so you'll know how this is set up. I think a good thing to do is to have one part of the dining room where you have all your plates and napkins, so every guest comes and takes a napkin and a plate, just very much like a buffet supper. And then also, if you have room, I would suggest having drinks like orange juice, tomato juice, Bloody Marys, or champagne, or whatever you'd like in the living room. And then the dining room is perfectly free. And then you have, on your big table, have the main courses. I always like to have a big bowl of fruit, and then you can have eggs of whatever kind of egg dish that you'd like, maybe stuffed HB eggs, and some meatballs in a delicious homemade sauce, cheeses, something like a chicken or a ham. And I like to have a salad niçoise. I think that's a very pretty on the table. And you can have, some people love to have soup for a brunch, and there's a lentil soup, which would be extremely nice with it. And we have also, there is our Gratin de morue. And here is the Brandade with extra little toast. And then you can have your dessert and coffee cakes and coffee setup. We have brioche and coffee cakes and homemade donuts and coffee and cakes, anything else that you think would go nicely with it. Usually a wine isn't served at a brunch, but actually there are absolutely no rules for it, and you can do whatever you'd like. And I just love this kind of a party because you can serve what you like and your friends can eat what they like. So the next time you entertain, make it a brunch and serve a Brandade de morue or a Gratin de morue à la lyonnaise, and I'll bet it'll be the hit of the party. It's not that cod is a humble fish. It's just been neglected. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.